The Manhattan sidewalk was quieter than usual for early evening. Mike Tyson and his security guard Marcus were walking back from dinner, moving at a relaxed pace through the city streets. Then Mike heard it, a voice older, nervous. "Please, I don't want any trouble." Mike could have kept walking. Most people would have, but that's not what happened. Mike stopped walking. 20 ft ahead, he saw three young men surrounding an elderly man who was trying to back away. What happened in the next 2 minutes would teach those three young men a lesson they'd never forget. This is one of those stories that didn't make headlines, but it happened. Before we get to that moment, subscribe for stories like this every day. Now, to understand how a quiet evening walk turned into a confrontation that left three men running down the street in fear, we need to go back to the beginning of that night. It was early evening in the mid-2000s, sometime around 7 or 8 p.m. Mike Tyson, now in his late 30s and retired from professional boxing, was walking through Manhattan with his security guard, Marcus. They just finished dinner at a restaurant a few blocks away. Good food, relaxed conversation, the kind of normal evening that Mike appreciated more and more as he got older. The streets were relatively quiet for Manhattan. The dinner rush had passed. The late-night crowd hadn't emerged yet, just scattered pedestrians moving along the sidewalks, the occasional car passing by, storefronts with their lights on, but not particularly busy. Mike was dressed casually, dark jeans, a button-down shirt, his leather jacket, nothing flashy. Marcus walked beside him, maintaining that professional distance security guards learn, close enough to respond to situations but not hovering. They were maybe 4 blocks from where Marcus had parked the car, just enjoying the walk, when Mike heard the voice, "Please, I don't want any trouble." The voice was older, male, nervous, the kind of nervousness that comes from genuine fear, not just discomfort. Mike slowed his pace, his attention shifting toward the sound. Marcus noticed immediately, his hand moving slightly toward his phone, ready to call for help if needed. About 20 ft ahead on the sidewalk near a closed storefront, Mike saw the situation clearly. An elderly man, probably early 7s, white hair, wearing a light jacket over a button-down shirt and slacks. He was holding 2 plastic shopping bags, the kind you get from a grocery store. He was backing away slowly, his movements careful, like someone trying not to provoke an aggressive dog. 3 young men, probably mid-20s, were surrounding him, not completely circling him, but positioned so he couldn't easily walk past them. 2 were white, 1 was black. All 3 wore casual street clothes, hoodies, jeans, sneakers. They had that particular energy Mike had seen countless times. Young men looking for easy targets, emboldened by numbers, thinking they were tough because they were picking on someone who couldn't fight back. The one in front, white guy, maybe 25, with short dark hair and a cocky expression, was doing most of the talking. His name was Brandon, though Mike wouldn't learn that until later. "Come on, old man," Brandon was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening. "You got a wallet in there, phone, something valuable." The elderly man, Frank, kept backing up slowly. "I don't want trouble. Please, just let me pass." One of the others, Kevin, white guy with bleached blonde hair, moved to Frank's left, cutting off that escape route. "We're not asking for much, Grandpa. Just empty your pockets and you can go." The third Malik black guy wearing a Knicks hoodie laughed. "Yeah, man, we're being reasonable here." Mike was already moving forward, his pace quickening, but not running, not yet. He wanted to see how this would play out, wanted to understand the full situation before intervening. Marcus stayed right with him, his eyes scanning the area for any additional threats, any other people who might be part of this group. Frank's voice shook slightly. "I'm a veteran. I served my country. Please, I don't have much." Brandon cut him off with a harsh laugh. "A veteran of what? The dinosaur age? Man, nobody cares about that ancient history." Kevin grinned. "Yeah, what are you going to do? Tell us war stories until we fall asleep?" Mike was 15 ft away now, close enough to hear everything clearly, close enough to see the genuine fear on Frank's face. Brandon stepped closer to Frank, invading his personal space. "I'm going to count to 3, old man." 1. Frank's hands were shaking, the plastic bags rustling with the movement. 2. Frank took another step back, nearly stumbling off the curb into the street. 3. Brandon shoved Frank with both hands, not hard enough to knock him down, but forceful enough to make him stumble backward several steps. The shopping bags swung wildly, one of them starting to tear. "Hey!" Frank's voice was louder now, desperate. "Stop it!" Brandon stepped forward again and shoved Frank harder, this time with enough force that Frank stumbled badly, nearly falling, only catching himself by grabbing onto a street sign pole. That's when Mike reached them. "That's enough." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, authority, the kind of tone that makes people stop and pay attention whether they want to or not. All three young men turned toward the voice. Brandon's hand was still raised, preparing to shove Frank again. Mike was now just 10 ft away, Marcus right behind him. The security guard had his phone out, ready to dial 911 if necessary, but his eyes were on Mike, waiting for a signal. Brandon looked at Mike, assessing. "This doesn't concern you, man. Walk away." Mike took 2 more steps forward, now just a few feet from the group. "I'm making it my concern." He looked at Frank, who was still gripping the street sign, his face showing relief that someone had stopped to help. "You okay, sir?" Frank nodded, not quite trusting his voice yet. Mike turned his attention back to the 3 young men. "You 3 need to leave right now." Kevin spoke up, trying to sound tough. "Who the hell are you? You don't tell us what to do." Brandon was staring at Mike more carefully now, something clicking in his memory. The build, the face, the distinctive voice. His expression changed from aggressive confidence to uncertainty, but he wasn't quite ready to back down yet. "Look, man, we were just what?" Mike interrupted, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Just pushing around an elderly man, just threatening him, just trying to rob him." Malik took a small step backward. "We weren't going to hurt him. We were just making him afraid," Mike finished. "Just using the fact that there's 3 of you and 1 of him to take what isn't yours." Brandon's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and lingering aggression. "Whatever, man, this is between us and him. You should mind your own business." He turned back toward Frank, raising his hand to point at him threateningly. "This isn't over, old man." Mike moved. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between himself and Brandon, his hand reaching out and grabbing the front of Brandon's hoodie. Before Brandon could react, Mike had twisted the fabric in his grip and pushed him backward with controlled force. Brandon's back hit the brick wall of the storefront behind him with a solid thud, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to make the point unmistakably clear. Mike held him there, one hand gripping the hoodie, keeping Brandon pinned against the wall. They were face to face now, maybe 2 feet apart, and Brandon suddenly understood exactly who he was dealing with. Brandon's eyes went wide. The cocky expression vanished, replaced by shock and fear. He tried to push back to break free, but Mike's grip was immovable. Brandon might as well have been trying to move a steel beam. "I'm sorry." Brandon's voice came out high and panicked. "I'm sorry. We didn't." Mike didn't say anything yet. He just held Brandon there, his expression calm, but his presence overwhelming. The physical reality of Mike's strength, the controlled power in that single grip, was teaching Brandon a lesson no words could convey. Brandon could feel it now. The difference between someone who talked tough and someone who actually was tough. The difference between pushing around elderly men and facing someone who could end this confrontation in seconds. "Please." Brandon's voice was shaking now, all pretense of toughness completely gone. "Please, we'll leave. I'm sorry." Kevin, standing a few feet away, had gone pale. "Holy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's Mike Tyson." Malik's eyes went even wider. "What?" Kevin was already backing up, hands raised in a placating gesture. "We're sorry, Mr. Tyson. We're really sorry. We weren't thinking." Mike kept his grip on Brandon for another moment, making sure the lesson had fully sunk in. Brandon's legs were shaking, his whole body tense with fear. Finally, Mike spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "This man served his country, risked his life for people like you, and you push him around for what? Pocket change?" Brandon couldn't speak, just shook his head rapidly. "You think that's what makes you tough?" Mike continued, "threatening people who can't defend themselves." "No," Brandon managed to gasp out. "No, I'm sorry. We're sorry." Mike released his grip on the hoodie and stepped back. Brandon stayed pressed against the wall for a moment, like his body hadn't yet processed that it was free to move. Mike turned slightly toward Kevin and Malik, both of whom were now several feet farther back than they'd been moments ago. You two have anything to add? Both of them shook their heads vigorously. Malik's voice came out stammering. No, sir. We're really sorry. Mike gestured toward Frank, who was still standing by the street sign, watching with a mixture of shock and gratitude. Apologized to him, not to me, to him. Brandon pushed himself off the wall, his legs still unsteady. He turned toward Frank, his voice shaking. We're so sorry, sir. Really sorry. We were wrong. We're sorry. Kevin and Malik quickly echoed him. We're sorry, sir. We shouldn't have done that. We're really sorry. Frank nodded slowly, still processing everything that had just happened in the last 60 seconds. Mike's voice carried clearly. Now leave. And if I ever hear about you three doing something like this again to anyone, you won't like what happens next. Brandon was already moving, giving Mike a wide berth, keeping his eyes down. You won't. I promise never again. We're leaving. Kevin and Malik were right behind him, both of them moving quickly, but trying not to look like they were running. Mike watched them until they'd turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Only then did he turn his full attention to Frank. The elderly man was still gripping his shopping bags, though one had a tear in it now. His hands had stopped shaking, but he looked emotionally exhausted from the fear and tension. Mike bent down and picked up a box of crackers that had fallen out of the torn bag. He handed it back to Frank, gently. You okay, sir? Frank took the box, his voice steadier now, but still quiet. Yes, thank you. I don't. Not many people would have stopped. Should have stopped before I got here, Mike said. But at least nobody got hurt. Frank looked at Mike more carefully, recognition dawning. You're Mike Tyson. Mike nodded. Yeah, I've seen your fights. My son was a big fan. Frank paused. I'm Frank Miller. I served in Vietnam, came home in '72. Mike extended his hand. Honored to meet you, Frank. They shook hands. Frank's grip still surprisingly firm despite his age. You live nearby? Mike asked. About 3 blocks. Frank gestured down the street. I was just getting home from the store. We'll walk with you, Mike said. It wasn't a question. Make sure you get there. Okay. Frank looked like he might object, not wanting to be a burden, but then nodded gratefully. I'd appreciate that. They walked together, Mike and Marcus, flanking Frank, moving at the elderly man's pace. Nobody spoke much. Frank was still processing what had happened. Mike was just making sure the man got home safely. 3 blocks later, they reached a small apartment building. Frank stopped at the entrance. Thank you again, Frank said, his voice more composed now. Those young men, they scared me. I'm not as strong as I used to be. You served, Mike said simply. That means something. That deserves respect. Frank smiled slightly. Not everyone sees it that way anymore. Then they're wrong, Mike replied. Before we continue, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Was Mike right to step in? Now back to the story. Frank went inside and Mike and Marcus continued their walk back to the car. Marcus spoke up for the first time since the incident. That was handled well, boss. Mike shrugged. Couldn't walk past that? Most people would have, Marcus observed. Most people aren't in a position to do something about it. Mike said, I was, so I did. They walked in silence for another block. Think those 3 learned their lesson? Marcus asked. One of them definitely did, Mike replied, thinking about the fear in Brandon's eyes when he realized what he'd gotten himself into. The other 2 probably did too. Whether it sticks long term, that's up to them. By the time Mike got home that night, he'd mostly forgotten about the incident. It was just another evening, just another situation that required a response. But for Frank Miller, it was the story he'd tell his family at dinner the next night. How 3 young men tried to rob him, how Mike Tyson appeared and stopped it with one hand and a few words. For Brandon, Kevin, and Malik, it was a lesson in choosing targets more carefully, or hopefully a lesson in not choosing targets at all. 3 young men surrounded an elderly veteran on a Manhattan sidewalk, pushed him, threatened him, demanded his money. Mike Tyson was 20 FT away. He walked over, gave them a chance to leave. They didn't take it. One grabbed and pressed against a wall later. Brandon understood the difference between acting tough and facing someone who actually was. All three apologized. All three left. Frank Miller got home safely with his groceries. That was the story. Simple, direct, over in 2 minutes.